What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, because I told you guys that we weren't done, even though we had that epic moment that happened. The ending of this comic, I'm excited to see how you guys respond, because it's amazing. So, of course, this picks up in the immediate aftermath of the great big huge epic moment that we just saw. Adult Franklin Richards basically making Galactus his herald, and then fighting the Mad Celestials, right? It was just ridiculously awesome. Now, of course, Valeria Richards, ever the sourpuss in the Fantastic Four comics, is really kind of giving us this monologue of everything that had gone on, talking about Franklin Richards facing off against the Celestials and the whole thing with Galactus, and she really is just kind of irritated at the fact that while it was all going down, she wasn't really doing anything. She was just kind of sitting there watching it all happen. The truth about Valeria is that as a kid, and any parent who knows this will probably tell you, kids are egocentric. They think the universe revolves around them, right? The whole world revolves around them. But one of the things that she kind of talks about and really muses to herself is she doesn't really like her older self. She feels like there's something off about her. And her older self is just kind of like, right back at you, kid. Like, I don't really like you either. There really isn't a major thing going on here, but it is kind of a funny moment. The other part about this is that you have Kid Franklin talking to his older self. The conversation between the two of them is really, really cool, because like Franklin, of course, approaches it from a kid's perspective, right? What would you do if you were a little kid and your future self showed up and basically crushed like some Celestials? You'd be amazed by it, right? You'd be like, we totally crushed those space gods, and I've got a beard. Is it itchy? And of course, adult Franklin is just like, yes, it is, because even with all my powers, I can't solve the one thing that plagues all men everywhere, an itchy beard. No, he does, his beard doesn't itch. But in reality, that's why I don't really keep a beard too much, man, because that damn thing itches like you wouldn't believe. But the thing about this is that, of course, he asks, like, can I call you Mr. Franklin? And that's when the response of his older self is yes, as long as I can call you Kid Franklin. So for those of you guys who are always wondering where the moniker or nickname for Franklin Richards came from and people calling him Kid Franklin, this is it. And that's how that works when it comes to Marvel Comics. For those of you guys who are unfamiliar with it, usually there's just kind of a colloquial name for a character that just takes hold and everybody just starts calling them that. It's just sort of the way those things work. And so, of course, the funny thing is he asked him, he's like, can I tell you a secret? And his older self is like, yeah, sure. And younger Franklin, Kid Franklin, is like, I always wanted my own Galactus. And of course, his older self is like, yes, I know. Now, this is a cool moment, because one of the things that we've always talked about when it comes to Jonathan Hickman is that he's very much on building things up, right? The idea of Franklin always having wanted his own Galactus, that comes to bear in Secret Wars. If you guys remember that story with Jonathan Hickman, there was a point where literally Franklin just sits in Galactus's helmet, right? He's like, he has his own Galactus. That's how this works, right? That's where this comes from. So it's the small little things that Jonathan Hickman always brings back in his story. Sometimes it serves no major plot point. It's just an offhanded remark that a character made at some point along the line, and it's really just a nice little moment to be like, I remember that when Franklin said he wanted his own Galactus. He finally has it, right? And it's like, it's a cool thing, right? It's just a cool little thing that goes on there. And so, of course, following this, what ends up happening is that while now it's time for cleanup duty, right? Basically heading back to New York, getting the city all sorted out, Galactus approaches Franklin Richards. So while everybody ends up taking off to the city of New York, adult Franklin stays behind. Now, this leads to one of the most important conversations between the two. And if you've ever read anything about adult Franklin Richards, you have heard of this conversation happening. That as Franklin and Galactus are basically spending time with each other, just kind of hanging out there, Galactus sort of muses and says, one day it will all end. Right? Suns will die and worlds will wither as the universe begins to cool. The heat death of the everything. For so long, I have thought I would face it by myself. And Franklin responds in saying, but now you know better. He says, I will be there standing beside you. We will watch as all that has been will become something new. The birth of a new universe. He says, still, buck up, big guy. We've got billions of years until we have to worry about that. Of course, Franklin is immortal. Now, there's been a couple instances in Marvel Comics when really Marvel has just sort of brought back the idea of Franklin's immortality. A great example of this is during Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers run, when Captain America is whisked through time by the Time Stone. Of course, he ends up in the future, basically at the end of all things, where he's brought below Kang the Conqueror and his alter egos, Immortus and Iron Lad. And they basically say, like, everything has to end. There's no conceivable way for you to stop the collapse of the multiverse. multiverse, so to make sure you don't screw up the time stream, we're gonna hold you here. Of course, Captain America ends up escaping anyway, and there's nothing Kang or Immortus or Iron Lad can do. If you're really excited about that, we do have a playlist with Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers on it. Because we've remastered Fantastic Four, we'll likely combine these into a new remastered full story, so you can kind of go forward and enjoy it in its modern form. But the thing about this is that Franklin's immortality came to bear when Captain America was whisked through time and encountered Franklin Richards thousands of years into the future. And Franklin he looks just like this, right? Now, the cool thing about that is Galactus chimes in and says, I feared the return of solitude, of being alone forever. I never imagined this is what you would become. Now, this is a great moment because one of the things to know about Franklin's history is over the years in Marvel Comics, his vast reality warping powers started off innocuous, right? It was the old Fantastic Four story, which I think was in issue 145. I'm not going to swear to it, but it's the one where Franklin's playing with a Rubik's Cube. He gets frustrated. There's a commercial on the TV that says, why don't you just grow up? And he subconsciously ages himself into an adult by using his reality warping powers. It was the first time we'd really seen him use his powers on that level. After that, it just got bigger and grander. So then you go into like Heroes Reborn, when Franklin Richards resurrects basically all the heroes who died fighting Onslaught. He resurrects them from the dead and then places them in a pocket universe that he created that he carries around in the form of a ball. Of course, they're all brought back during Heroes Return, but then you go into the Abraxas saga where he resurrects Galactus from the dead the first time. So it's one of these things where over the years in Marvel, Galactus has actually watched Franklin. He's watched the things he's done and he's seen what he's capable of, but he had never really imagined that Franklin Richards would be able to achieve this level of power. And it's not so much what Franklin Richards did here, it's Galactus combining the sum total of all things that Franklin has done and the analysis that the Mad Celestials came up with, which is that he's beyond Omega level. The reality, and depending on how you want to slice it, Galactus and Franklin are equal in power, but there are stories that have been done that have indicated that Franklin is actually beyond Galactus in terms of power, that he's more powerful than Galactus is. And so, of course, Franklin, in response to Galactus' statement, simply says, well, you'll have to wait a little longer. Union occurs further down the road. So the idea is that when the universe collapses and it dies, and then it explodes with a big bang into a new universe, that Galactus and Franklin will be the two last living things in existence. They will merge and they'll be reborn as a new cosmic entity that's a combination of both. Now, of course, once they all get back to New York City, while the Fantastic Four do clean up their mess, they do it kind of unceremoniously. They open a portal to the negative zone, and basically all the stuff that's been destroyed and all the cars that have been trashed just get thrown into the negative zone. So literally, they're just stuffing everything into a multiversal closet, more or less. And it's kind of funny to see because, of course, the Baxter Building is reconstituted, and in fact, it's modified a little bit so that the younger kids in the Future Foundation, because they're composed of like different races or different parts of the world, that they all have their own individual habitat where they can basically reside and live in a kind of comfort, right? So it's cool to see that it's been modified in that capacity. Now, of course, the next thing that goes on is they all basically take off into space, because what's happened is that Reed Richards and them have created something called the Foundation, right? The orbital space station education facility in geosynchronous orbit above the Baxter Building. Basically meaning that as the Earth rotates, it rotates with it, and it's always directly above the Baxter Building in Marvel Comics. So it's actually a cool little thing, like a direct satellite. But this is where they'll receive a lot of their education. And so following this, what you end up doing is having the Fantastic Four dealing with Valeria. Now, this is a really, really cool moment here, because what goes on is that before adult Franklin returns, that as Valeria is talking to the Fantastic Four, they're like, okay, we need to have a conversation, right? Reed and Susan are like, we need to have a conversation. And one of the things that had gone on, of course, as you guys notice over the course of this run, there was a lot of deceit being performed or being done by Valeria. She was lying to people, tricking people, and all of it was done in service of a greater cause. But the point that Reed and Susan are hitting at is, this cannot be a regular thing. Of course, Ben Grimm chimes in and is just kind of like, nobody likes bad girls, kiddo. And then Johnny, of course, is like, well, I mean, you know, like, I mean, that ain't always the case, Ben. Sometimes bad girls are good, you know, like. But of course, it's a funny thing because she ultimately makes a promise where she tells them, yes, no more secrets. I won't hide anything from you anymore. Wrong, because here's what happens. If you guys recall, right, when everything was popping off and you had like the Mad Celestials who were still on the other side of the portal before they had arrived to Earth, that you had this moment where where basically Doctor Doom was going to keep the one, or going to be the one that would basically buy them time so they could get to the portal on the other side and close the portal off. Dr. Doom's still trapped over there, right? He's still trapped there. What Valeria had told him is she said, find a way, Uncle Doom. Find a way to stay alive. There's something in there, something that's worth the cost of you stepping in and buying us time. It's why Dr. Doom did this. He literally stayed here because there's a benefit to it. And so where the Mad Celestials were more focused on incapacitating Doom because they didn't really see him as like a credible threat, they effectively knocked him out. As soon as he was done, they focused on trying to find a way through the portal because that was their main effort, right? I mean, literally time was ticking. The portal was closing, right? So it was really more of just running out of time as opposed to like, this guy Dr. Doom's annoying, let's just kill him right now, right? And Doom's powerful enough to be able to hold off Celestials, even if not outright destroy them. But because he's survived, he makes his way through the Citadel of Doom. You guys remember at the very beginning of the story when we learned about the Council of Reeds, what they were doing. The Citadel is not totally destroyed, right? Dr. Doom finds one of the seats on the throne, right? The 3 seats that were held by those different versions of Reed. He ends up reconstituting, or at least taking out the other 2 seats. He has one for himself, and that's it. And as he sits down, he puts on one of the Infinity Gauntlets, he picks up one of the swords, and then out of nowhere, he sees someone ask the question, Doom. And that's literally when all these lobotomized Dr. Dooms start ascending out of the rubble and literally just kind of like worshiping Dr. Doom himself. And as they start shouting his name, Dr. Doom is like, yes. And he just sits down on the throne, surrounded by those who would worship him as a god, and simply says, here I can build. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. The Parliament of Doom has arisen. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.